Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC podcast. This episode brought to you by HVAC Pro Blog. Learn more at hvacproblog.com. All right, everyone. We appreciate you joining us and spending some time today. We're hanging out with Chris Morin. Chris, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Clifton.
No, it's an honor. I mean, I've been watching your stuff for a long time. We just finally recently had the opportunity to catch up and see where each other's at in this whole like crazy social media HVAC world that has kind of became the norm in the last few years. If you look back like 5 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of quality content. There's a few pretty big names out there, but it was kind of focused, right? It was just honed in on certain aspects of the industry. And I love it now because we have all these different voices and these different backgrounds and different perspectives. So Chris, tell me a little bit about your background because it sculpts who you are and what you offer back to the
It
industry.
does. Yeah. So obviously a lot of the stuff that I offer is through my own personal experience, whether good or bad, right? So I
Yeah.
started in HVAC when I was 16. I got my first job. I actually went to vocational school, like a lot of people
Mhm.
in the trade. I thought I was going to be a cook. So I did one semester culinary arts. I got an A. It was awesome, except
Hey.
it was the most boring thing I ever did, right? My uncle's a cook, so I got to be careful, I'm sure. But my father was in the business, and so were my friends. They were in that particular trade, so it was easy for me to make the transition, right? So I got my first co-op job right around 16, 17.
Mhm.
And I realized there was a lot of broken down guys with bad knees and stuff climbing around attics. I thought, man, I got to get out of here before I end up like that, right? So I couldn't afford college, so I thought I was going to go in the military to pay for college. Right, my grand plan was going to be an electrician. Right, I was
Yeah.
going to get the hours in the Marine Corps. They're going to make me an electrician, but unfortunately, they made me a refrigeration mechanic. So at that point, I just embraced it. So I was
Exactly.
a service tech, service manager. I worked for a utility program implementer, teaching
Mhm.
quality installation, and then most recently, before I did this full time, I worked for 10 years at Mitsubishi Electric. So I was a business development manager there before I left in the Northeast.
Fantastic. So quite a bit of background, and a lot of the background that you use comes from the military experience, right? We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about your book and talking about how you're helping the industry. Especially from a lot of lessons learned, right? And I know a lot of these are stories uh, that really kind of shape like who we are as individuals, right? Like life lessons. And one particular story in your book about standing your guard sets a narrative. Let's talk about that for just a minute.
Yeah, I think you must be talking about Wayne. I interviewed
Mhm.
Wayne Dvorak. He was on guard. Boy, this was quite some time ago. I don't want to give away Wayne's age. So a general pulled up, didn't have the necessary pass to get into his area. It was a high security
Mhm.
area. And he really had some struggle with non-negotiables, right? So when it comes to standing his ground and having integrity, really was a huge test for Wayne. And I think that translates really well to our industry. But
Yeah.
basically, he didn't let the general in. The general didn't have the credentials, and it was a top secret area, and at the time it didn't look well for Wayne,
Yeah.
right? But it worked out in his favor because the general realized that's the guy that we want on guard, right?
Mm.
So that translates pretty well, when it comes to having integrity in our trade. So it's really easy to sell a oversized system because it's easier to than having the conversation with the homeowner, right? Or selling an undersized system because it's cheaper, right? There should be a level of integrity that you're upholding, right? Things where you're not going to cut corners and you're not going to compromise safety or performance, obviously, right? But if you want to earn respect in the trade, then integrity builds that foundation for your business.
I believe that just as people in general. You go through a variety of different words that have lost meaning that used to be very impactful words when you were becoming a man or a young woman and becoming that leader, right? It all kind of comes back into a form of leadership. I hear a lot of words, integrity, justice, tact. These are all important words for me myself. I didn't go to the military. I was supposed to. I was actually it's funny because I was supposed to go into the army for electrical, and I had a friend of mine, a female friend of mine, that had encouraged me not to, so I didn't go. But my father was a Marine, my brother is a Marine, and I learned to speak. I get this question a lot. It's like, where did I learn how to speak? It was a learned skill set. I learned it in the Masonic Lodge. So
Yeah.
when I hear these terms, like justice and integrity, those are things that have been important in the sculpting of who I am, because it really it crafts us as individuals, and how we present ourselves and how we deliver ourselves, whether it's individually or whether it is as a company. It really comes down to a lot of those key principles, like that concept of justice, right?
Yeah.
Let's dive into that a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, so justice, one of the first, traits that I talk about in the book, right?
Mhm.
So, if you didn't know, in the Marine Corps, they teach you the leadership traits very early in training, and there's an acronym like everything else in the military, right? And the
Yeah.
acronym is, JJ did tie buckle, right? So that acronym, there's a letter for each trait. So
Yep.
justice is the first one: justice, judgment, decisiveness, right? That's what the acronym stands for. And, what's interesting is justice, it's not complicated, right? The problem with justice is it's challenging. And
Mm,
I think when it comes to the HVAC trade, the best way to really make sure that you're holding on to justice is really starting with documentation of your
mhm.
policies and not having ambiguity, and letting it cause inconsistency, if that makes sense. I don't want to use a lot of big words here, right? I want to make sure that you guys know, like, I've seen a
Paint with
lot of
crayons,
owners.
buddy. This is a paint by
Yeah,
crayons
right.
show.
Yeah, exactly.
But no,
Um,
it's making sense completely to me.
yeah, no worries. Yeah, actually, in the Marines, they always joke Marines eat crayons, right?
Yeah.
So, so anyway, so I've seen a lot of owners. They make decisions
Yeah.
based on their mood or their gut feeling rather
Yeah.
than principles, right? And that inconsistency is what really erodes trust, right? I think that's really where justice, can be a part of your leadership,
Yeah.
or it can be a problem for your leadership, right?
Mm,
And I think the hardest test there is when, like, your best performer, when they break one of those rules, right? So how are you going to handle it? Is it going to be different for your best performer because you don't want to lose them,
that's true.
or is it going to be consistent? And if you're consistent, then you're going to shine as a leader, right?
Mhm.
And if you if you make exceptions for your stars, then it's one of those things where it's just, it's a rule that's rarely enforced, and it's only for these people, right?
Yeah,
It destroys morale, creates resentment. It's a problem. It's not justice. It's inconsistency at that point.
sure. Kind of leads into, like, another word that you have an entire chapter on called tact, right?
Yeah.
And, and,
I laugh
let's
because
talk.
I was a service tech and a service manager, so we
Uh-huh.
struggle the most with tact, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand exactly what that is. So tell us, as we're talking about integrity and building things around justice and that consistency, right? Right, having a
Yeah.
place where we truly feel like there's a process and a procedure for things, and I'm going to be treated justfully. But we also have to do it tactfully.
Yeah, yeah. I think the key for tact is not like avoiding the truth. That's not having tact, right? It's delivering the message effectively.
Right.
So, like, if I train somebody about, and I want to talk about tact, I'm going to talk about the bridge method.
Hmm.
And really, when you start talking about, the bridge method, what you want to do with a salesperson is, like, you want the salesperson to acknowledge what the customer knows, right?
Right.
And then bridge to additional considerations and then guide them toward a better solution. Because it's not about proving them wrong, or, showing your dominance and that sort of
Right.
thing. It's about expanding their perspective,
Yeah.
right? And you can do that with tact. You can't do that if you're trying to be the smartest person in the room, right? And I think, you know, technicians unfortunately have this label. Uh, we tend to get a little too blunt as far as what we see for the previous contractor's work, or the previous person, even at my own company, right?
Yeah. I've seen that myself.
And yeah, and if you don't deliver that message with tact, like, even if we mess something up, customers should know that. But if you say it the wrong way, it totally erodes trust. And are they going to trust somebody else to come back? And then, sure, you're the hero, but you're the only hero now. You're on your own. I learned that early on, like where somebody will wait for the service manager. They don't want anybody else to do maintenance on their equipment, or we'll find another company because my guys didn't have tact, So,
Sure.
and I think residential, it's more common as far as the need for that because you're in so many homes and you're dealing with the homeowner. I think if you ever shift over to commercial, I think that those guys don't have to interact with the building owner as often. So having a little less tact probably isn't a big problem. You could still make it. You know, Residential, you got to have it if you want to make it in the
Every
industry.
job in residential. Yeah, in the
Yeah.
commercial, that's where I spent most of my time was in commercial refrigeration, commercial building automations. And so as long as you had a good rapport, with the manager of that property or, the manager of the store, it was pretty easy. But when you
Yeah.
talk about like residential, especially on the service side, right, it is a different manager every time. And that tact comes into play, especially now more than ever, as we see so many, larger private equity companies buying up mid-size, family-owned companies and trying to maintain that tact, in the way that we serve our customers. And it's a lot of lessons to learn because it can be a big transition when you have a corporate entity that purchases and goes, all right, this is our product of the month, and at the same time you have to go, but I'm here to deliver a solution for my consumer, my homeowner. So there's a lot to be said. I'm glad you did a whole chapter on that because there's a lot of things you can dive into that. All right,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was
Sorry.
just gonna say, as we're building, right? So we're talking
Yep.
about building, these are the foundation blocks for personality, right? And so we start focusing on tact. Well, then we understand what it is. Now, how do we deliver it?
Yeah.
How are we gonna take some initiative to do this?
Yeah. This is one of those things where like try to say this, the communication and making it a part of your training and having a feedback loop is important, right? So I hate to say it, but like, and every technician is going to hate me for saying this, but role play really helps you with tact because it becomes part of your conversation and how you're delivering it. And unless you record yourself and hear it, you're not going to have the same feedback or understand, because I might be overly exaggerating my, roll my eyes or something like that. I wouldn't even know because it's not coming out of my mouth, but the other person picks it up, right? And I think if you're a technician, technical experts, they try to make the mistake, or they often make the mistake of switching into like a lecture mode, right? So instead of asking questions and helping them, discover limitations, they try to tell somebody what they need, right? Instead of helping them find that, right? And I think if you're asking questions and you're genuinely actively listening, then you can actually have tact in that conversation. If not, even if you're trying to deliver it with tact, it comes across very ingenuine because you're not actively listening, right? So you're just thinking about the next thing you're going to say, and try to be smart, right? And unfortunately, it comes back to haunt a lot of people. I think a great example would be like, every customer right now thinks mini splits are the answer for their house, right? And in some cases they are, right? Ductless,
Right.
trust me, I sold it for 10 years, right?
Mhm.
So I could force that into any application you want. But instead of just saying, yeah, maybe like you start with like you've clearly done your research on efficiency, which is fantastic. Let's see how we can achieve that efficiency if we consider the layout of your homes and the comfort pattern needs, right? And then introduce all of the solutions because it's possible ductless is the answer for that particular customer. Um, and if they already have an existing duct system, I think there's a way of working that into the conversation to help them understand there's other options, and as opposed to no, you don't want to do ductless, right? You have a ducted system. It's a waste of money if you do ductless, or you're just going to leave that. I mean, there's a lot of things that come across that from a technician or a salesperson that, if you're not working on it, can be viewed as untactful for sure.
Mhm. I believe one of the best tools that any technician can have is their smartphone.
Yeah.
Right? Think about that whole
Yeah.
conversation. You know, you're sitting here, how am I going to present this to the homeowner? You're sitting in a van or a vehicle with closed windows, and you may have somebody with you, you may not. The worst you can do is pick up your phone, set it on the dash, record yourself in that conversation and play it back. We're only talking a
Yeah.
couple of minutes to be able to see how you're going to be received to that homeowner. I use it all the time. It's really it's the first thing that I tell people they need to do if they're going to be on a podcast or a show of any type. Record yourself first. Listen to how you present yourself, and then see if anything needs to be changed.
Oh,
You're
boy, I'll
we
tell you,
are
there's nothing more humbling than that,
yeah.
Clifton.
No, we're our
When you
best
start
critics.
doing yeah, when you start doing your own video editing, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
So, yeah, you really start to appreciate the editing and the people that do that for you sometimes.
Yeah,
So,
and I know how so many technicians are already TikToking. Just use that time wisely. Instead of putting up the
there you go.
TikTok what you had for lunch, do that presentation. How am I
Yeah.
going to go talk to Mrs. Jones about this system that she has?
So, you know, it's funny, on that, driving around the car, obviously, I
Mhm.
listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of books,
Yeah.
things like that. But in the Marine Corps, what's interesting is once you reach a certain rank, you're expected to lead physical training and,
Mhm.
march platoons and stuff.
Mhm.
And the Marine Corps doesn't teach anybody how to be a singer. So, what I learned was you can actually set your windshield wipers to a certain speed, and you can learn cadence that way. So I'd be, windows up, driving around North Carolina.
Hit it.
It's not raining,
Watch
but
it.
the windshield's wipers are going,
Yeah.
and I'm yelling away, learning how to
Timing.
sing cadence. So, yeah, it's amazing what you can do when those windows go up and nobody can hear you. So it's a huge opportunity for yourself.
We've talked about integrity. We've talked about doing things tactfully. Let's also talk about like having a bearing. I know one of the stories you have is using a paperclip to jumper a faulty switch during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Let's talk
Yeah.
about though, like how bearing plays into the role of personal development.
Yeah, I think in that instance, you have to ask yourself if that solution's creative or is it just risky, right?
It's just as dumb,
So
right?
yeah, yeah. So that actually was creative, I can tell you. We were in the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere. That was actually the invasion of Iraq.
Mm,
We had a generator fail, and we had to risk either sending that thing back, which, yeah, obviously, when you start sending something back
man,
from the front line,
days.
create introduces all these problems, right?
Yeah.
And I grabbed the wiring diagram, traced it out, and figured out, hey, it's that plastic switch that wasn't designed for sandstorms. So I think delivering that information, and having the trust in yourself to know that it's a creative solution and it wasn't a risky solution. The risky solution was sending that generator back.
Mm,
So I think being able to face that situation when there's no textbook solution, and being confident with it and delivering it the right way is having bearing.
yeah.
I think the best HVAC companies kind of create environments where technicians share these solutions, and they don't keep them as like personal trade secrets, right? Like I would never go around telling every generator mechanic how I jumped out this switch, right? And actually, it's funny. Right above my desk, they gave me a Navy Achievement Medal for it. I don't. I mean,
Ingenuity.
yeah, I guess it's one of those
Mhm.
things where we did what we had to do, right?
Yeah.
And I still believe it was the right solution until we can get a better answer down the road.
Sure.
And I think that's the difference, right? Professional bearing during that creative problem solving is crucial in order for it to be adopted.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think bearing's a tough one to teach, but I think it boils down to comfort and trusting yourself in order to deliver that message, right? So otherwise, if I didn't have any bearing, man, to explain that to the troops,
Yeah.
yeah, here's a paper clip. Good luck.
Well, I think about, any business owner right now, that is, based on the product brand of choice that they have, who whatever their primarily brand dealership is, they have to have bearing as they're having hard discussions with their technicians right now on product availability and refrigerant detection sensors and proper best practices and reviewing tools. So a lot of that goes into having having the ability to keep a bearing for your company, knowing that there's going to be change, right? Because this,
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned is that like the HVAC industry is never static, right? There's always things that are changing, and being a part of a team where you have bearing and you know that there's going to be problems and you're going to get through it, and you're going to have a method for doing that is very crucial. Tell us a little bit about that section of the book.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is knowledge, right? And
Hmm.
knowledge in our industry is it's never static. If you stop going to classes, the industry just passes you by. We
Yeah.
see that with, just efficiency changes or refrigerant changes or code changes, you name it, it's a very dynamic industry, which makes it very interesting and
Hmm.
lucrative, right?
Yeah.
But knowledge development, it needs structure. It's just not intent. Like it has to be a priority for your company and your technicians, and they need to show up wanting to learn, right? Or it's just going to be a check in the box and it's not going to make the difference for you. So it's really easy when things get busy to, knock off the Wednesday morning that you used to have for knowledge, right? Or whatever meeting you want to call it. And there's different levels of knowledge too, which I talk about in the book. I usually have
Right.
a three-layer approach. So there's a fundamental knowledge, right, where it's like refrigeration
There's the
principles and
core
building
stuff.
science. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
And then there's the current technology training, right? So
mhm.
equipment specifics and control systems, right? And then of course there's the emerging trends, right? And I think that's the piece that I think a lot of people don't keep up on until it's already there.
Yeah.
And I think the businesses that do really well with the latest and greatest are the ones that make time and schedule time for that third piece, the emerging trend piece. So
Mm,
heat pumps, integration with smart homes, things like that, right?
yeah.
Maybe having a partner that does solar. There's a lot of things that are coming down the road that, you know, are really part of a big home services company these days.
Mhm. No,
So somebody that
100%.
does all of it.
Y
So me personally, I block out Friday mornings for new technology stuff. Sometimes it's listening to a podcast, right? If it's a new
Mhm.
technology related. Sometimes it's reading articles, YouTube videos. I use some AI stuff to help me do it fast. So
Yep.
there's some things out there like Recall and a few other AI tools to help the research. But AI is not creating this; they're summarizing. You know,
Yeah.
so it's important to
I
use
agree.
those tools out there for you, especially when it comes to knowledge.
Yeah. It's definitely for research purposes.
Yeah.
It's a tool in that. But, what you're saying really all comes down to, especially when you're looking at, being prepared for new technologies and, new innovations, it's about, having endurance as a company and even as a technician, right? This serves not only that business owner, but that technician that strives to be a high end technician, the best in their field.
Yeah.
It's a matter of endurance, right? It's because it's constantly going to change. If we get stagnant, if we start getting to that point where we accept that, what is around me is all that there is ever going to be, we're not going to be successful. And so
No.
having endurance to get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big part, right? And actually, that's the
Mhm.
last of the traits in my book. I think, the most resilient HVAC companies, first build a strong financial system, right?
Yep.
So they have cash reserves, they can handle seasonal fluctuations and unexpected market shifts like we've seen recently, right? Depending on
Mhm.
when you air this. I think, they can do really well in the busy seasons, but they might burn through all of their cash in the winter because they didn't think about that, right? They didn't have the endurance when it came to that. But if you have that built in place, then really the next piece there is cross training. If you want to be a good technician, and actually this is far beyond just the HVAC trade. If you want to be good at your job, no matter what you're doing, by cross training, you're making yourself the most valuable employee, right?
Absolutely.
So they can't let you go, right? It's your choice to leave at that point, right? So it's really about operational endurance then, right? So, every critical function in the business needs to have like a backup person that can step in. There's many times where like the lead technician works himself into the ground 60, 70 hours that week, and you just can't come in. He's on call. Yeah, I've been there too, you know? To the point, actually, I was a pretty good technician when I was younger, maybe because I moved faster. I don't know.
Mhm.
But I gave myself mono senior year of high school, right? I was working 3 jobs and I was on call. I thought I was Superman, you know?
Yeah.
So my mom said it was from something different than working too hard,
Right.
but I insist this was fun, right? So, but when I manage service teams, we have like systematic training, so no single person's absence could cripple the operation, right? Like
Mm.
we didn't shut down jobs because one person got sick. Like if the whole team did, I mean that happens,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It shouldn't be the norm though, right? And then also to documentation. That I think that's a big thing that builds organizational endurance, right? So if somebody leaves, they don't take that organization with them. If you have some sort of manual process when it comes to how we do installations, it's written down. This becomes a standard we teach to. This is the standard we hold everybody to when it comes to raises and that sort of thing, right? So it becomes you know uh, a way where knowledge loss when someone's gone doesn't hurt your company, because there is going to be turnover. Sometimes people
Mhm.
leave for bigger and better things. I felt sometimes I regretted leaving places, but other times I felt like there was no more there for me unless I was going to be the owner. And it's a small business. I was never going to be the owner. So it was time for me to move on and give somebody else the opportunity. And hopefully I trained somebody well enough to jump in because I documented all that stuff, right? So that was the idea anyway.
Yeah, no, all fantastic, stories and, realistic business practices, all part of your new book. Tell us about this book and other resources and training opportunities that
Yeah,
you've
thanks,
got
Clifton. Yeah,
available.
so actually just released exclusively on Amazon. It's Leadership
Mhm.
in HVAC,
Awesome.
applying Marine Corps leadership traits to residential contracting. So it's in the 175-page range, but
Yep.
it's a little larger print for those that need the glasses.
What?
I think it's a great resource. So it's one of those things where if you really want to work on being a good leader, which our trade makes really good technicians, really good installers, even really good salespeople. But being a leader, really have to work on, right? And I think it's a good resource to revisit all the time. It's not one of those things you just read and put it away because
Mhm.
I took the one thing away from it. I wanted it to
Right.
be almost like a workbook for you, right?
Hmm.
So in the back, there's actually a 5-step process for implementing leadership traits that I
Mhm.
walk through. Start with an assessment, identify the most common things, right? There's a 5-step process that after you understand what each one is, you can kind of grade yourself and see what you need to work on and where to implement. So I give you some good advice in there. That's not the only thing I teach, right? That's what I wrote based on personal experience. I'm actually an ACA EPIC instructor. So locally, I'm known mostly for my system design trainings. So I
Mhm.
teach manuals J&S, manual D and duct diagnostics. I have an online virtual masterclass that I tend to
Mhm.
run. The last one this spring, though, we just kicked off for this month. So we won't be offering that again until the fall. We obviously know that most technicians and salespeople are a little busy in the summertime
Getting
in
busy.
the United States. So we hold off during the summer for those. But I do offer coaching and consulting as well. So if somebody is interested in learning to be a better leader or fixing some stuff in their process or just starting to create processes, I think you'll find that's one of my expertises. I happen to be a certified professional coach too.
And where can we learn more?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So if you go over to my website, hvacproblog.com, there's a handful of items up on the top. You can find there's a coaching tab, services. I do actually offer support with system design as well.
Mhm.
So if you have a set of plans on a complex house and you want to subcontract that out, I have the ability of helping you with that as well. But hvacproblog.com, or if you just want to jump right to some video learning, I have
Mhm.
over 200 trainings on YouTube that you can check out for free.
Nice. All right, Chris, I sure appreciate you hanging out with us. We look forward to more trainings and opportunities in the future. Just glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Clifton. Same here. I appreciate the opportunity with you, and good luck to everybody this summer.